The city of Seoul glittered like a crown of diamonds 50 floors below. Inside the glass-walled boardroom of Kong Industries, the air smelled like expensive cologne and dangerous money. Powerful men in sharp suits sat around a long obsidian table, their faces carved from stone. At the head of the table sat Kong Day-One. He was a big man with broad shoulders, a shaved head, and eyes like polished iron. His dark suit was perfectly pressed. His presence alone made the room feel smaller. Across from him sat 3 Japanese businessmen in matching gray suits, their faces polite but unreadable. Between them stood the translator, a beautiful Korean woman named Soo-Jin Park. She wore a cream blazer and pearl earrings, and she spoke in a smooth, musical voice that made everything sound reasonable and safe. The contract on the table was thick, 50 pages, small print, big consequences. Kong Day-One lifted his heavy gold pen. The businessman leaned forward slightly. Soo-Jin smiled her careful smile. Nobody in that room noticed the janitor wiping the glass wall in the far corner. Nobody ever did. His name was Marcus Webb. He moved slowly, deliberately, like a man who had learned that stillness was survival. But behind his tired eyes, something sharp and dangerous was quietly waking up. Marcus Webb had been cleaning this building for 14 months. He wore the same faded gray uniform every day. He kept his head down. He spoke to no one unless spoken to. The security guards called him the quiet one. The office assistants sometimes left him coffee without saying thank you. He never complained. Invisibility was not a problem for Marcus. It was a strategy. Before the gray uniform, Marcus had worked for a powerful intelligence agency. His specialty was language. He spoke 9 languages fluently, including Japanese, Korean, Mandarin, Russian, and 3 regional dialects most people had never even heard of. He had spent 12 years decoding hidden meanings in foreign negotiations, finding the lies buried inside perfectly constructed sentences. Then, 3 years ago, everything collapsed. His own supervisors had framed him for crimes he uncovered them committing. They erased his records and declared him dead. He disappeared before they could make that official. Now he lived quietly, invisibly, safely. Or so he believed. As he wiped the glass wall in slow, steady circles, Marcus listened to the conversation at the long obsidian table. His expression never changed. His hand never stopped moving. But his mind was suddenly running very fast. Because Soo-Jin Park had just said something that did not match what the Japanese businessman actually said. Not even close. Marcus kept wiping the glass. Slow circles. Steady breathing. But every nerve in his body was on fire. The lead Japanese businessman, a thin older man named Takeda, had just spoken clearly in formal Japanese. He used a very specific phrase. The phrase meant temporary licensing rights. It was a limited agreement. Kong Day-One would keep full ownership of his ports. He was simply lending access for 2 years. Standard. Safe. Soo-Jin Park turned to Kong Day-One and translated with a warm, confident smile. But the word she used in Korean did not mean temporary licensing rights. She used a completely different legal phrase. One that meant permanent and total transfer of sovereign port control. One sentence. One swap. The difference between a handshake and a funeral. Marcus set down his cloth very carefully. His heartbeat was loud in his ears. He stared at the dirty glass panel in front of him without seeing it. He knew exactly what those ports meant. Kong Day-One's entire shipping empire ran through those 3 eastern ports. Without them, his supply chains would collapse within 60 days. His rivals would move in within 90. And without his business empire, a man like Kong Day-One would not survive long in this world. Marcus looked at the gold pen rising toward the paper. He made a decision that terrified him completely. Every instinct Marcus had built over 3 years of hiding screamed at him to stay still. Keep wiping. Keep breathing. Stay invisible. You are a dead man, his mind reminded him. Dead men do not interrupt billion-dollar meetings. Dead men do not make enemies of people who can erase them twice. He gripped his cleaning cloth so tightly his knuckles ached. He thought about his small apartment across the river, his single shelf of books, the window with the broken latch he kept meaning to fix. That quiet life had cost him everything to build. One word from him could destroy it in seconds. He looked at the table again. Kang Dae-won was reading the last page of the contract. The three Japanese businessmen were perfectly still, watching. Soo-jin Park stood slightly behind Kang's right shoulder, her hands folded, her expression serene. She looked like a woman waiting for something she had already planned perfectly. And that was the detail that settled it for Marcus. He had seen that expression before, on people who had already won before the game officially started. He picked up his cleaning cloth again. He moved slowly across the room toward the serving station near Kang's end of the table. Each step was deliberate, controlled. His face showed nothing, but his mind was already calculating every possible outcome, and not one of them was good. Marcus reached the serving station beside Kang Dae-won's chair. He pretended to notice a smudge on the polished wood surface and leaned in slowly, wiping it with his cloth. He positioned himself just inches from the CEO's left ear. Soo-jin Park's eyes moved to him immediately. Sharp, alert. He felt her gaze like a blade against his neck. He kept his head down. His lips barely moved. His voice was so quiet it was almost just breath shaped into words. The translator just gave away your eastern ports permanently, Marcus whispered. That phrase she used is not temporary licensing. It means total surrender of ownership. Do not sign. He straightened up and stepped back, returning to his cloth and his smudge. The room looked exactly the same, but Kang Dae-won's hand had stopped moving. The gold pin hovered above the dotted line, perfectly still. A full second passed, then another. Then the CEO slowly lowered the pen to the table without signing. He did not look at Marcus. He did not look at Soo-jin. He looked at the contract in front of him with completely unreadable eyes. Soo-jin Park's polished smile flickered. Just once, barely visible. But Marcus caught it, and he understood immediately that she had caught something too. She now knew someone in this room understood exactly what she had done. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Soo-jin Park recovered quickly. She leaned forward slightly and addressed Kang Dae-won in a gentle, concerned voice, asking if everything was all right. Her Korean was warm and reassuring. Her eyes were not. Kang Dae-won did not answer her immediately. He set the pen down carefully and straightened in his chair. The Japanese businessmen exchanged a single glance. Takeda's face remained polite, but his shoulders had tensed. Soo-jin turned her gaze across the room and found Marcus standing quietly by the serving station. She spoke in quick, sharp Korean, addressing him directly. Her voice was no longer warm. She told him that service staff were not permitted in the main boardroom during active negotiations. She told him to leave. Her tone made it sound like a reasonable policy. Her eyes made it sound like a threat. Marcus bowed his head slightly and began gathering his supplies. He moved unhurriedly toward the boardroom's side exit, keeping his face blank. But as he passed behind Soo-jin's position, he heard her whisper something very quietly into the small microphone clipped near her collar. It was Japanese, a dialect most people in Seoul would never recognize. But Marcus recognized it. She said 3 words. The plan shifts. Marcus walked through the side door without changing his pace. He let it close quietly behind him and immediately pressed himself against the corridor wall, his mind moving at full speed. Inside the boardroom, Kang Dae-won picked up his gold pen again, but he did not open the contract. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and looked at the Japanese businessmen with a relaxed smile. He told them he wanted to clarify one small detail before signing. He said his personal legal team had always described the arrangement as temporary access only. He asked Soo-jin to confirm this with the delegates directly. He watched her face as he asked. Soo-jin translated the question, but she did not translate it correctly. Instead of asking about temporary access, she told the Japanese businessman that Kang Dae-won was confirming his full understanding and agreement with the permanent transfer. Takeda nodded smoothly and responded that yes, they were all aligned on permanent terms. Soo-jin turned back to Kang Dae-won and told him, with her warm smile, that the delegates confirmed it was simply a routine licensing arrangement, nothing unusual. Kang Dae-won nodded slowly. He clicked the pen once. Then he set it down again. He looked at his hands on the table. A silence settled over the room that was different from before. Heavier. The kind of silence that comes just before a very controlled man decides to stop being controlled. Sujin's left hand moved almost invisibly to touch the microphone clip at her collar. One small, quiet tap. Outside the room, something began to change. Kang Dae-won reached for the heavy crystal water glass in front of him. He lifted it, drank slowly, set it back down without a sound. Then he picked up the gold pen. He held it loosely in his fist for a moment, and then, with a single sharp movement, he squeezed. The thick metal barrel of the pen buckled and cracked apart with a sound like a small gunshot. Black ink poured over his fingers and dripped in dark lines across the white contract pages. The Japanese businessmen flinched hard. One of them knocked his chair back slightly. Takeda's face finally lost its politeness. Kang Dae-won set the broken pieces down very carefully. He wiped his ink-stained hand with a cloth napkin, fold by fold, without hurry. He looked up at the Japanese delegates and spoke in a calm, perfectly controlled voice. He told them he needed exactly 24 hours for a final internal review. He thanked them for their time. He stood up. His two bodyguards moved to the doors instantly. The businessmen gathered their briefcases in silence and left quickly. When the elevator doors closed behind them, Kang Dae-won turned to face Sujin. She stood very still in her cream blazer. Her pearl earrings caught the light. She was breathing carefully. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said 4 words. "Bring me the janitor." 2 of Kang's guards found Marcus in the service corridor on the 48th floor. They did not explain anything. They simply walked on either side of him and guided him back upstairs with the kind of polite firmness that meant no was not an option. They brought him into a small private office behind the main boardroom. Dark with desk. No windows. One overhead light. Kang Dae-won was already there, standing with his arms crossed, his ink-stained hand wrapped in a clean cloth. The guards closed the door and stood in front of it. Kang studied Marcus the way a man studies something that does not make sense but might be important. He asked Marcus's name. Marcus told him. He asked how long Marcus had worked in the building. Marcus told him 14 months. Then Kang leaned forward slightly and asked the real question. He asked how a building janitor understood the difference between temporary licensing language and sovereign transfer clauses in formal business Japanese. Marcus looked at the floor for a moment. He considered his options. There were not many. He said he had picked it up from television programs. He said he watched a lot of Japanese dramas online. He asked quietly if he could please return to his work. Kang Dae-won did not smile. He reached into his jacket pocket and placed a small glowing tablet on the desk between them. He turned it around slowly so Marcus could see the screen. Marcus felt the blood leave his face completely. The screen showed a photograph of Marcus, a younger version, sharper and straighter, wearing a dark agency badge. Beside the photograph was a bright red classified marker and a file reference number. Beneath that, 3 words that made his stomach drop completely. Status: deceased. Confirmed. Kang Dae-won tapped the tablet screen once. He told Marcus that his facial recognition system had flagged him the moment he entered the boardroom today. He said the agency file listed Marcus Webb as a senior intelligence linguist, killed in a classified operation 3 years ago. He said the interesting part was not that Marcus was alive. The interesting part was that someone powerful enough to falsify a federal death record had wanted him gone very badly. He asked Marcus, in a quiet and reasonable voice, to tell him everything. Marcus sat down in the single chair across from the desk. He was tired of running. He could feel it in his bones, that deep exhaustion that comes from carrying a secret for too long alone. So he told the truth. He explained what he had discovered inside the agency, how he had found the financial crimes, how they had framed him, how he had barely escaped. He told it plainly, without drama. When he finished, the room was silent. Kang Dae-won looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded once, slowly, and said, "So you understand betrayal." While Marcus sat in the private office telling his story, Sujin Park had slipped away from the main boardroom. She moved quickly through the executive hallway in her heels, her face blank and controlled. She stepped into the private washroom at the end of the corridor and locked the door behind her. She opened her designer bag and pulled out a small black phone, the kind that never connects to a network anyone can trace. She dialed a number from memory. It rang twice. A deep male voice answered with no greeting. Sujin spoke in a fast, quiet Japanese dialect. She said the signing had been disrupted. She said the janitor had interfered. She said Phase 1 was compromised, and she was activating Phase 2 immediately. The voice on the other end said nothing for 3 seconds. Then it gave a single instruction. Sujin ended the call. She opened a second application on the black phone. She typed a short override code. Across the building, deep in the security control room on the 42nd floor, a small program she had secretly installed 6 weeks ago quietly activated. The freight elevator on the building's north side, which had been locked to outside access for security reasons, clicked softly. Its control light turned green. Sujin put the black phone back in her bag. She fixed her lipstick in the mirror. She straightened her pearl earrings. Then she unlocked the washroom door and walked calmly back toward the executive suite, as if nothing at all had changed. The man who stepped out of the freight elevator on the 49th floor did not look like a threat. He wore a gray delivery uniform and carried a wide equipment case. His movements were easy and unhurried. He nodded politely at a passing office assistant who glanced at him once and looked away. People see uniforms, not faces. Marcus had understood that truth for years. The man walked the service corridor without hesitation, moving toward the back offices like someone who knew exactly where he was going. Because he did. He had studied the building's floor plans 2 days ago. Marcus, sitting in the private office, felt something change in the air before he heard anything. It was a subtle pressure shift, the way a room feels when someone enters a space nearby and tries not to be heard. His body remembered the feeling from his old life, before the gray uniform and the quiet apartment. He stood up slowly. Kang Dae-won looked at him. Marcus raised one hand to signal quiet. He moved toward the office door without making a sound. He pressed his back to the wall beside it. Through the small gap at the door's hinge, he caught a sliver of the corridor outside. A shadow moved across the far wall. Too careful, too deliberate. Marcus turned to Kang's 2 bodyguards and looked directly at them. He held up 2 fingers, pointed at the door, and made a cutting motion with his hand. The guards understood. Their hands moved to their weapons. The door of the private office opened inward before the man in the delivery uniform reached it. He had expected to find a lightly guarded room with a frightened janitor. He found instead a dark doorway and silence. He stepped through. The heavy equipment case swung up fast in his hands, turning into a weapon. But Marcus was already moving. He grabbed the man's wrist with both hands and drove it sharply against the doorframe. The case dropped. They struggled in the tight space, fast and brutal and completely silent, neither one wanting to make a sound that would draw the wrong attention. The man was strong and trained. Marcus was smaller but faster, and he knew how to fight dirty from years of fieldwork nobody would ever put in a report. He drove his elbow back hard into the man's ribs. The man grunted. The bodyguards moved in from behind and pinned him to the floor with efficient, practiced force. It was over in 12 seconds. As the man was pressed face down against the darkwood floor, Marcus saw a small rectangular device blinking red on the man's belt. He recognized it immediately and felt his blood turn cold. He grabbed Kang Dae-won's arm and spoke very quietly, directly into his ear. He told the CEO that this man was carrying a biometric dead man switch. It had already registered the failed mission. In approximately 45 minutes, armed backup would breach the building. They were no longer dealing with a translator and a bad contract. This was an organized military operation. Kang Dae-won absorbed the information without blinking. He gave 3 short instructions to his bodyguards, and they moved immediately, dragging the unconscious operative to a secured storage room and beginning a quiet, total lockdown of the executive floors. Kang made 2 phone calls. Marcus listened to both without comment. By the tone and the pauses, he understood that Kang's own security network was already being repositioned. It was well-organized and fast. Marcus revised his initial read of the man. Kang Dae-won had not built a billion-dollar empire by being slow. The 2 men returned to the private office and Kong spread a digital floor plan of the building across the desk tablet. Marcus studied it. The building had 6 access points. 2 were already compromised by Sujin's security override. The rooftop helipad was exposed. The freight elevator was now back under building control, but whoever was coming would have other entry methods planned. Marcus counted the time they had. 40 minutes, maybe less. He told Kong they needed to do 3 things before the breach. First, they needed to know exactly how many of Kang's people Sujin had already turned. Second, they needed to reset the communications blackout before outside contact became impossible. Third, they needed to keep Sujin inside the building and away from any exit until they understood the full shape of her plan. Kong looked at him steadily. Then he said, "Tell me how." Kong Day One walked back into the main executive dining room at exactly 9 o'clock that evening. He had changed his shirt and poured himself a drink. He looked calm. He summoned his 4 senior lieutenants and told them it had been a long day and they would share a late dinner before the morning's rescheduled negotiations. He told Sujin, in a warm and ordinary voice, that her translation services would be needed tomorrow and asked her to stay. Sujin agreed with her smooth smile. She had no reason to suspect he knew anything yet. Marcus had coached Kong carefully. During the dinner, Marcus circled the table quietly, refilling water glasses and collecting plates, back in his gray uniform, invisible again. But now he was listening with a specific purpose. Kong turned to Sujin at one point and apologized for the awkward interruption earlier with the cleaning staff. He said the building services manager was terribly embarrassed. He slid a 1-page contract summary across the table and asked Sujin if she would read the highlighted terms aloud for his lieutenants, just to make sure everyone was aligned before tomorrow. It seemed like a small, ordinary request. Sujin looked at the page and began reading in her clear, confident voice. She had no idea that Marcus, standing 3 feet away with a water jug, had a hidden phone in his uniform pocket with the recording application already running. Every word she spoke was being captured perfectly. Halfway through dinner, Marcus set down the water jug near Sujin's chair. He leaned over to refill her glass and spoke very quietly near her ear. He told her, in the same rare Japanese dialect she had used on her microphone earlier, that the Ghost Dragon Group's offshore accounts had been frozen that afternoon by an anonymous financial report. He said it like casual small talk, like a man sharing something he overheard. He straightened up and moved away. The crystal water jug slipped from Sujin Park's perfectly manicured fingers. It hit the table edge with a sharp crack and shattered, spraying water and broken glass across the white tablecloth. The sound was loud and sudden in the quiet dining room. Every lieutenant's hand moved to their jacket. Kong Day One did not move at all. He simply watched Sujin. She stood very still in the wet, glittering mess. Her cream blazer was spotted with water. Her pearl earrings caught the light one last time. Then, slowly, the careful performance left her face entirely. The warm smile was gone. The gentle eyes were gone. What remained was something colder and sharper, a face that had been hiding behind good manners for a very long time. She looked directly at Kong Day One. She told him plainly that he had already lost. She said her loyalty had never belonged to him. She said the name of the organization she truly served. The dining room went completely silent. Sujin smiled with something like relief, as though taking off a mask she had worn too long. She told Kong that it did not matter what he knew now. She explained that earlier, while the negotiations were happening, she had done something much more significant than mistranslate a contract. She had accessed Kong Day One's encrypted financial credentials through a hidden program she had loaded onto the boardroom tablet system 6 weeks ago. While everyone was focused on the drama of the broken pen and the janitor, her program had been quietly running in the background. She told him that by now, 50% of his liquid assets had already been moved into accounts that only her voice could unlock. She stood up straight and looked at him with absolute certainty. Then she pointed at the grandfather clock on the dining room wall. She told him that the armed operatives outside had been expecting a confirmation signal from their inside man at midnight. Since that signal never came, they would now breach the building using alternate entry points. She told him the penthouse shutters had already been remotely disabled from the inside. She told him the emergency phone lines to outside security were cut. She folded her hands in front of her and waited. At exactly that moment, the lights in the dining room flickered once. Outside the tall windows, red and white lights began moving in the dark city sky below. The breach had already begun. The dining room erupted into controlled chaos. The 4 lieutenants drew weapons. 2 moved to the windows. 2 covered the doors. Kang Dae-won stood absolutely still, watching everything with cold eyes. Marcus dropped the water jug completely and moved to the main security terminal built into the dining room sidewall. His hands found the keyboard before his mind had fully formed the plan. He pulled up the internal communications feed and began isolating the encrypted radio channel the operatives outside were using. He recognized the frequency from 3 years ago, when his agency had tracked the same organization across 4 different operations. His fingers moved fast, but there was a problem. Someone inside the room had disabled 2 of the building's internal shutter locks before the dinner began. Soo-jin had been sitting at this table all evening. She could not have done alone. Marcus turned around and looked at the 4 lieutenants. He needed 30 seconds of silence. He asked Kang to instruct each lieutenant to answer 2 simple questions. He listened carefully to each man's answer. The first 2 were clean. The third answered strangely, using passive language and indirect phrases, separating himself from the specific times and actions of the evening. It was subtle. Most people would miss it. Marcus did not miss it. He pointed at the 3rd lieutenant, a man named Cho, and said quietly but clearly, "He is the one." Cho moved before anyone could reach him. He drew his weapon in one fast motion and pointed it directly at Kang Dae-won's chest. The room froze. Cho backed toward the dining room's private exit door, his eyes moving fast between the other lieutenants and Marcus. He shouted that nobody should move. His voice was slightly too high. His hand was slightly too tight on the weapon. Marcus had seen that kind of tension before, in men who had made a choice they could not unmake and were only now understanding the full weight of it. Kang Dae-won did not look at the gun. He looked at Cho's face. He spoke in a very quiet voice. He told Cho that he had known him for 11 years. He asked him simply why. He said nothing. He glanced at Soo-jin, who was watching for a chair with her arms crossed. She gave him no signal. She gave him nothing at all. In that moment, the explosion happened. Not in the dining room, but below them. A deep concussion rolled up through the building's structure, rattling the windows and tilting the glasses on the table. The breach had reached the lower security barricades. Cho flinched at the sound. It was half a second, but Kang Dae-won was already moving. One clean, precise shot. Cho went down. The room was ringing. Outside, the sounds of the assault were getting closer. Marcus was already back at the terminal, typing the most important code of his life. Marcus pulled out the hidden phone from his uniform pocket and connected it to the security terminal. He found the audio recording from dinner. Soo-jin's clear voice reading the financial contract terms aloud, all the account numbers and access codes embedded in the document she had not realized was a trap. Using a program he had kept on a small drive hidden inside his cleaning cart for 2 years, a legacy tool from his intelligence days, he stitched the audio clips together in 40 seconds. He built a flawless voice composite. He ran it through the terminal's microphone port, aimed directly at the bank's biometric verification system. The screen flashed red. Then it processed. Then it turned green. Marcus moved fast. Every account Soo-jin had loaded with Kang's stolen assets. He reversed the transfer completely. Then he went further. Using the same access codes her voice had unlocked, he located the Ghost Dragon organization's primary offshore reserve accounts and drained them entirely into an untraceable holding structure. The terminal went dark just as the dining room doors burst open. Armed operatives flooded in, weapons raised. But the commanding officer's phone was already ringing. The man answered it. His face changed completely. He lowered his rifle. Without money, an army is just men in expensive jackets standing in a room they can no longer afford. Soo-jin understood what had happened before anyone explained it. She looked at Marcus, still standing at the terminal in his gray uniform. And for the first time, her certainty was completely gone. Kong Day One looked at the man no one had ever seen and asked one quiet question. Will you stay? Marcus looked out over the Seoul skyline, bright and enormous, and full of people playing games they thought were secret. For the first time in 3 years, he did not feel like hiding. Yes, he said, I'll stay. Before you go, like the video, comment what you would have done in his place, and share this with someone who loves stories like this. Subscribe if you want more, because we're just getting started.